what you do in festival land, literary festival land, is to try and bring your links in the world to a place where you can start bringing in people who are really well known, better known. I mean, certainly the people we have in New Westminster are fantastic. I mean, we're just so rich in writers and poets and actors, the whole 9 yards. But in New West, as we're fighting against Surrey and their literary festival, and in Vancouver and so many others, you have to make sure that you're bringing in some good people. And so we, through Candace, met this young fellow you're going to meet just now, and he agreed to be our author in residence. We have an author in residence program. It's appropriate to do that. Last year was Renee Saragini Saklakar, and she's coming up a little bit later. But Gary told me, when you're announcing my name, I'm going to kill you if you say it wrong. I said, what do you mean? And he said, it's Geddes, like lettuce. Oh, okay. As opposed to what? Not Shreddies, Geddes. No, it's lettuce, Geddes. Oh, okay, I got it. So, Gary Geddes is our keynote speaker tonight. He's also our author in residence. We're very pleased. He's a lovely man. He's had a huge history. He's one of Canada's best known and most celebrated writers. He has written and edited more than 45 books of poetry, fiction, drama, non-fiction, criticism, translation, and anthologies. How many went to English in school? He edited and put out the anthology of 20th century writers. So you saw that in school. That was one of his contributions, and it remains a legend and a boat anchor, because I studied that too. Commonwealth Poetry Prize for the Americas region, the National Magazine Gold Award, BC Lieutenant Governor's Award for Literary Excellence, and Gabriel Mistral Prize from the Government of Chile for his political writing. His latest works are Drink the Bitter Root, a writer's search for justice and healing in Africa, and a selected poem collection called What Does a House Want? So I'd like to introduce to our stage, and with thanks for him being here, and bring him on the stage with a good round of applause, Gary Geddes.
Thank you very much. It's a mixed blessing being back in New Westminster. I was a bit terrified when Candace offered me this, even more terrified when I accepted. I wanted to be able to start off with something funny, like Thompson Highway when he gives a talk. He said, you know, I was born in the far north. It was so far north we didn't have hemorrhoids, we had Polaroids. But I couldn't think of anything terribly funny, so I tried to assess why I was so nervous about coming here, and it was because when I was writer in residence at Douglas College for a brief time, I had a visitor who shocked me rather terribly. I'd been in Afghanistan on a Taliban visa 3 weeks before 9/11, and I was working away on my computer, and I found this email. Somebody in Vancouver who was a poet and a heroin addict. He said, I do some rather strange things. And he said, but I really would like to have contact with you as a kind of mentor. And I foolishly said, okay. And anyway, he showed up at the college here at a reading I gave, and was desperately wanting to see me. So I said, okay, well, I'll meet you for lunch and we'll go to the old spaghetti shop down the road. And anyway, he showed up and he was sitting there with me at this meal. He was incredibly nervous, sort of fidgety, and he didn't hear a thing I was saying the whole time. I thought, Jesus, what's going on here? So eventually it was cut short, and I went and started to pay the bill. And I turned around, and there he was, standing in the middle of the old spaghetti shop, taking his clothes off. The shirt, the pants, and he was just about to drop his underwear, and I shrieked, no! And he continued to do the whole thing. And then, just as I was heading out the door, I looked back, and No, he didn't have a spaghetti hanging there. But he was about to do the complete circuit naked. And I ran out the door. I was so humiliated, I didn't know where to put my face. And I thought, I don't want to be seen with this guy on the street anymore. Anyway, that was the last time. So if any of you are planning to do that routine tonight, just wait till we're finished. I'm going to start by reading a couple of poems. This new book of mine called What Does a House Want is a selected poems published by Red Hen Press in the United States. It's my first big US publication of poetry. I've had a couple of non-fiction books published there. And I've been on a US tour, and it sounded great going to Harvard, New York, Chicago, St. Louis, Charlottesville, and so on. But it turned out to be rather different. P.G. Wodehouse was correct when he said they stayed away in droves. So I'm glad there's more than a drove of you here tonight. It's really great. I'm going to read a couple of poems about my mother, who died in Vancouver when she was 35, and I was 7. And somehow, when I was twice the age that she died at, I began to think again a lot about her. And I had kinds of conversations with my mother and started to write poems from memory. And this one is called I'd Swim 3 Words. As my mother lay dying in a dark, cold room where plumbing and ductwork were visible overhead, and cracks in cement walls sprouted spiderwebs and dust, I recalled the flume at the X that flung us headlong, risible in the extreme, plunging like hell's hounds into the shrieking crowd, mouths wide, kerchief blown back, her body language quizzical, as if laughter were verboten, out of bounds, a thing unexpected, a joker outed sans warning. When I stood by the bed, my small hand clasped in hers, I had grounds to wonder if she would die. Though I doubted this, of course, thinking only of myself, my needs, days at the beach in English Bay or Kitsilano, where I tossed sand-flouted authority, sun-baked bodies, the air reeking of seaweed, chips, vinegar, hot dogs. Some days I feel her speak through me, the few remaining strands of damp brown hair at 6s and 7s across her forehead, lips pursed, facial muscles contracted in a worry, mortal counsel, endnotes, obligatory whispers with their dread finality. Resolute, I played the elf, doing the dog paddle across the frayed linoleum, trying to make her laugh. A tad of whimsy left on the back shelf would suffice. She rallied briefly, half alert, pulled herself into a sitting position, the skin slack around her neck, eyes closed from the effort. Grimace or laugh, I knew not. But she who swam kilometers from Fisherman's Cove to Point Atkinson managed a thin smile, patted my head, and traced on my body the necessary letters. When she was sick, she took me with her. I'm just going to move this, we're getting a little bounce here. She took me with her to the Vancouver General Hospital for her cancer treatments. And this poem is about my childhood memories of that time. It's called The Celebrity. Mother dressed to the nines, high heels, beige wool suit, hair piled up at back, fit to kill. And so they did. The doctors, the cells, the primitive equipment. Cancer ward, VGH, post-war medics, health squad of warriors armed with radium tubes, hit-and-miss fluoroscopes. If uranium can take out 2 Japanese cities and end a long war, it can surely handle, properly directed, a few wayward cells. We'd call this target practice, except you don't get a second chance. Radiation therapy, intended to shrink the uterine tumor. What to expect when these gadgets were still being used in stores, kids shocked and delighted to see the skeletal outline of their bones inside a new pair of shoes. In the waiting room, I thumbed the pages of Life, Saturday Evening Post, thinking how important my mother must be, getting all this attention, nurses dropping by to chat and cheer me up, my short legs, two frenetic pendula pumping beneath the square chrome tubing of the chair, the promise of ice cream post-op. My mother there amongst the great names, Rontgen, Becquerel, Curie, but no call from the Nobel Committee for her, only an early death at 35, and no record of where her radioactive ashes went at Mount Pleasant Crematorium. But still, she had the style and sense of occasion to expire on Valentine's Day, a mini triumph, a heart stopper. After my mom died, I was very fortunate. My father and mother had been divorced, and he decided to come and take me and my brother to live with him in Saskatchewan. So we headed off to the prairies on the train, and I had a few surprises in store for me. One of which was called long underwear. I'd never seen these things before, and when they told me they had the thing at the back was called a trap door, I tried to get in by putting it on that way. Sort of Houdini special. The other thing was there was no indoor plumbing. We had a two-seater sports model outhouse about 100 feet from the back door. And nobody ever told me why there were two holes in this thing. You didn't get anyone saying, let's go and have a crap together. But if you want to know, I mean, we've reached the nadir of good taste here, so if you want to know afterwards, you can ask me and I'll tell you why. But the thing about that outhouse that was so memorable and so important in my career as a poet and a young capitalist was that there was no toilet paper, only Eaton's mail-order catalog. You know how slippery those pages are? You had to develop your editorial skills immediately and decide which pages could be used, and you spent the time crumpling them up. So I kept the tractors and farm equipment and women's lingerie, and the rest did its inevitable job. But I got an incredible consumer orientation and became a capitalist at the age of 8. So I decided if I ever grew up, which seemed unlikely to me or my parents, that I would do my own catalog. And here it is, it's called The Promised Land. When I went to spy out the land, I took shin pads, gas masks, snow tires with metal studs, radar, bazookas, reconnaissance planes, foot powder, dental floss, FN rifles, forged languages, a passport, a dozen languages, hospital insurance, and a jock strap with a metal cup. On my way to case the land, I took Batman comics, walkie-talkie, hand grenades, and bayonets, a yo-yo, the memory of mother waving clean socks and underwear, life insurance, the Encyclopedia Britannica, Moses' Blessing, a cassette, a Mickey of Rye, antihistamine, a few addresses, bongo drums, Playboy, equipment for wiretaps, green garbage bags, Kleenex, laxative, an inflatable raft, flares, pemmican, corn plasters, return tickets, spare batteries, contraceptives, and atlas. I knew New West was the right place. I sold the whole lot the first day. It's a good thing we all have a kind of anal fixation, isn't it? When I was a graduate student at the University of Toronto, I had an office mate named Gus Heidemann, and we shared an office for a couple of years, and his face got longer and longer each day that he shared an office with me. He'd come in the morning, he'd glance over at the desk, and there'd always be a fragment of poetry that I'd written that he was expected to critique. One day he came in and he looked over, and there it was again, another piece, and he looked, his face was so long, he looked as if he'd swallowed a hockey stick. He said, Gus, I said, Gus, what's wrong? He said, look at Gary. He said, William Blake may have found a universe in a grain of sand, but you're not going to find a universe in your belly button, so stop looking at it. He said, there's a world out there, there are migrations, there are civil wars, there are accidents, there's poverty. Why don't you write about something other than yourself? So I crept out of that room and I went home and had a couple of beers and turned on the television set. And to my astonishment, the first mass murder by a man with guns was being reported on the television. It was at the University of Texas. And a man named Charles Whitman had gone into the tower with his carefully selected arsenal and had begun to pick off students between classes. It was a shocking story to think that the Whitman family, for one thing, had produced the greatest poet in the 19th century, along with Emily Dickinson and the two great American poets. And they'd also produced a mass murderer a century later. It didn't quite seem to balance. But it made me think of that line in T.S. Eliot's Love Song of Jail from Prufrock, which I never understood before. He says, indeed there will be time to murder and create. It's as if there's a channel we have in our bodies with this energy coming up, and it can take a destructive or a creative outlet. And I thought to myself, God, this is really, really interesting. It was so troubling. I felt I needed to write something about it. I thought maybe this is what Gus Heidemann meant.